Hundreds of thousands of years ago, Earth was not the home we know today. It was a borderless realm, ruled by colossal beasts and indomitable forces. Icy winds swept across the plains, volcanoes roared on the horizons, and oceans crashed against uncharted shores. In that savage world, humans were but a quivering spark, a species struggling to survive among titans forgotten by time. This is the story of those days, of the creatures that reigned before us, and of the silent dance between life, evolution, and extinction. Through jungles, savannas, glaciers, and deserts, we will travel to the depths of time. We will explore the lives of beings who seem to come from myths, but who once walked the same ground as you and me. It is a journey through the fossil footprints of the past, a reconstruction of the giants that humanity has almost erased from its memory. Prepare to discover a world that existed long before written history. A world where the Earth still spoke the language of monsters. The world as we know it is an anomaly, a fleeting exception in the long line of time. 300,000 years ago, the Earth was an inhospitable, brutal place, shaped by savage forces beyond the control of any creature. The seasons were capricious. Ice slithered like tongues of death over Europe and Asia, while scorching deserts stretched across other regions, teeming with life in its rawest and most colossal form. Life didn't hide. It bellowed, ran, hunted, and fled. It was an eternal cycle without rest or compassion. The first light of dawn touched the open savannas where twisted horned giants moved like shadows across the tall grass. In the impenetrable jungles, primal roars drifted into the mist, and in the caverns, barely lit by the glow of the fire, humankind began to gaze toward the horizon, unaware that they themselves would be the architects of the end of that era. Humans were nothing more than prey among beasts. With stone tools and trembling hands, they faced creatures whose size defied reason. Yet, they were not alone. Animals of mythical proportions shared their world. Hulking bulls, bears that dominated entire caverns, birds as tall as saplings. Each was a living page of evolution, a natural masterpiece sculpted from bone, muscle, and endurance. This fierce and unstable landscape was also a testing ground. What survived here wasn't necessarily the strongest, but the most adaptable, the most cunning, the most capable of withstanding the trials of climate and chaos. Thus, stories emerged that still resonate in fossils buried beneath layers of ash and sediment. Stories that tell us not only about animals, but about the very pulse of the planet. The Pleistocene winds blew strongly, sweeping away entire species and giving rise to new life forms. It was an endless choreography in which every step meant life or death. Animals were not static symbols. They were protagonists of biological epics written in stone, bone, and memory. And amidst this vastness, something was changing. A spark was igniting in the hominids' eyes. It wasn't strength that would distinguish them. It was awareness, fire, history, the ability to look beyond the prey and see the story, to trace figures on the cave walls with blood and mud. The world had awakened, and with it, its storyteller. But this was just the beginning. For among the giants who walked the earth, one in particular raised his horns to the sky like a forgotten god, and his name was Pelorovis. On the vast plains of Africa, where wildebeests and zebras now run beneath the scorching sun, reigned a being from another time, the Pelorovis, a creature not content to simply exist, but rather imposed itself as a living emblem of power. With its crescent-shaped horns, which could reach more than 2 meters from tip to tip, it advanced like a king across the golden grass. Its silhouette was feared, respected, and perhaps even worshipped by those early humans who shared its paths. The bones we've found speak of a colossus that stood almost 2 meters tall and weighed more than a ton. But it wasn't just his size that made him legendary. It was the way his body conveyed a perfect blend of brutality and elegance. His strength was as real as it was symbolic. He was the kind of animal that made the ground tremble, bent trees in its path, and blazed trails with just his breath. For a long time, scientists mistook the Pelorovis for a common buffalo, but upon closer study, they found a missing link between modern bovines and an older, wilder era. It was a vestige of the Pleistocene, a relic with horns that told the story of a world without limits. And perhaps most shocking, it not only lived among humans, it was part of their legends. In caves across Central and North Africa, figures with large horns decorate the walls. These are drawings made with ritual intent, with fire and shadow. The world's first artists didn't draw for entertainment. They drew to remember, to invoke, to honor. The Pelorovis was there, in their visions, walking among men and gods, between the real and the sacred. It is said that some tribes worshipped it as an ancestral deity, the spirit of endurance. For others, it was a formidable adversary, a food source that demanded respect and strategy. In both cases, it was central. It wasn't a simple animal. It was a force of nature, and its disappearance also marked the closing of an ancestral chapter. What made the Pelorovis extinct is still debated. Perhaps it was climate change. Perhaps it was hunting. Perhaps it was simply history itself, advancing without asking permission. But every bone, every painting, every buried footprint reminds us that it once existed, and that when it roared, everything stopped. However, it wasn't the only sacred monster roaming the lost lands. Elsewhere in the world, an even stranger creature defied the laws of logic and biology, the Macrauchenia. In the heart of South America, amidst endless plains, misty forests, and untamed pampas, a figure emerged that seemed drawn by a capricious god. It was as if someone had assembled parts of different animals into a single body: the torso of a camel, the elongated neck of a giraffe, and a head topped by a strange nasal protuberance. This was Macrauchenia, a creature that obeyed no rule of evolutionary logic, a living mirage that defied all known categories. While large predators stalked through the undergrowth and early humans crossed the Andes with their souls on fire, this peaceful beast grazed elegantly, oblivious to the awe it would one day inspire. Its gait was agile and steady, supported by long three-toed paws that left deep imprints in the clay soil. But what was most striking wasn't its gait, but its face. A nasal opening high on its skull, between its eyes, gave it a ghostly appearance, as if it were more of an idea than an animal. For centuries, scientists debated its lineage. Was it a relative of horses? A distant offshoot of camels? An evolutionary echo of elephants? No answer was definitive. Macrauchenia seemed to sneer from the past, defying taxonomists, hiding its true origins behind the mists of time. It wasn't until the 21st century, when advances in molecular genetics made it possible to extract fragments of fossil DNA, that we began to unravel the mystery. And what those genes revealed was disconcerting. Macrauchenia was distantly related to perissodactyls, a group that includes horses and rhinoceroses. But its offshoot was solitary, an evolutionary experiment that had flourished and disappeared in isolation, like so many South American wonders. For millions of years, it evolved in complete solitude, protected by the barrier of the oceans, until fate and climate caught up with it. With a robust body weighing almost a ton and a length of 3 meters, it was no easy prey. But change is the only constant in world history, and the arrival of humans changed everything. That creature that seemed to have a trunk, perhaps to search for food in the undergrowth or regulate its temperature on hot summer days, gradually disappeared. Not because of weakness, but because of maladjustment, because it was too unique to adapt to an increasingly uniform world. Today, its bones rest beneath layers of stone and silence, and yet Its figure lingers in the imagination of those who look back. Because Macrauchenia wasn't just a strange animal, it was a witness to entire eras, a message from the earth, written in flesh and mystery, that still resonates in the breeze of the pampas. But while in the south there was confusion, further north, a slow but imposing creature dominated the arid landscape. A giant sloth that would challenge our ideas about adaptation and resilience. Notrotheriops. In the vast, dry lands of the American Southwest, where vegetation barely survives amidst thorns and the harsh sun, a creature advanced with the solemn slowness of an ancient ritual. It didn't run, it didn't hunt, but its mere presence was enough to dominate the landscape. It was the Notrotheriops, a ground sloth of astonishing proportions that, against all logic, made the desert its sanctuary. Where others perished, it flourished. Where water was lacking, it found life. Long before cities existed, even before the word was carved in stone, this herbivorous colossus roamed the caves and hillsides of what we now call Arizona, Nevada, and northern Mexico. Its front legs were like columns of rock, adapted to dig up roots, uproot yucca, or defend itself with the brutality of a being that understood the fragility of natural balance. It had a thick, powerful tail that served as support as it reared up on its hind legs to reach the tall foliage. It was a desert-designed survivor. It wasn't an animal of the forest or the jungle. It was a creature of the sun and dust. Its habits were recorded in an unusual legacy. Its fossilized excrement, known as coprolites, found in caves like Rampart Cave in the Grand Canyon. These remains reveal not only what it ate, but how it lived. Traces of its diet are there: agave, cactus, plants as resilient as its own. Its body didn't need abundance, only adaptation, and it was a master at that. Its lineage belongs to an extinct family of ground sloths that once dominated the entire continent. But Notrotheriops had a peculiarity that set it apart from its relatives. It was one of the last to disappear. Some of its footprints date back only about 11,000 years. This means that this giant walked alongside the first humans who crossed the Bering Strait, coexisted with spear hunters, and those who lit fires to scare away ghosts. In those same caves where their remains were found, there are also traces of primitive humans, stone tools, faded embers, remains of temporary homes. Everything points to an inevitable encounter, that of the herbivorous giant and the small hunter. It wasn't a battle, it was a collision of worlds, of times, of destinies crossed in the shadows of history. And just as it came, it also went. Perhaps human pressure, perhaps a change in climate, perhaps both. But its disappearance was silent, as was its life. A retreat without screams, without blood, only absence. And yet, Notrotheriops left us with a lesson. There is no environment too hostile if you know how to listen to it, if you learn to walk with the rhythm of the wind. But even in Africa, where life explodes in every imaginable form, an even more bewildering and elegant creature emerged from the undergrowth. A beast of mythical proportions and an ancient gaze, the majestic Civatherium. At the intersection of myth and matter, where ancient gods crossed the savannas with feet of stone and crowns of bone, lived a creature whose presence evoked awe, the Civatherium. Its name means Beast of Shiva, not by chance, but because its proportions seemed too bold even for nature. It was as if the gods had decided to play with shapes. 4 bony projections sprouting from its head, 2 of them curved like the antlers of an elk, and 2 others, straight like spears, rising to the sky with brutal grace. It wasn't a legend. Its bones rest in the fossil beds of North Africa and the Indian subcontinent, where time has stood still in temples and ruins. Civatherium was real, a compact, muscular giraffe with a shorter but more powerful neck. It strode like a silent emperor through the mists of the late Miocene. When it stood tall in the tall grass, it stood over 3 meters tall with its head held high, and its silhouette was not easily forgotten. It lived in changing landscapes, open forests, humid plains, savannas that oscillated between fertility and drought. In these unstable environments, Civatherium found its niche. Its body, more robust than that of its modern relatives, was a living fortress. Its jaws were designed to devour tough leaves, fibrous branches, even resilient grasses that others avoided. It didn't choose, it adapted. That was its virtue and its motto. Its lineage dates back to the earliest giraffes, but while their descendants evolved ever longer necks to reach the treetops, Civatherium chose a different strategy: strength, versatility, presence. Instead of competing for the unattainable, it reigned over the in-between. It was an intermediate titan between the subtlety of the giraffe and the rudeness of the moose, a balance that bordered on perfection. For thousands of years, it coexisted with other legendary megafauna: primitive elephants, colossal rhinoceroses, hippopotamuses that resembled living sculptures, and predators with tusks as sharp as blades of dawn. And in that scenario, filled with threats, the Civatherium endured, not as the fastest nor the most lethal, but as the most imposing. Its presence deterred, its gait tracing invisible maps of respect. But even gods fall. The end of the last great ice age brought irreversible changes. Vegetation changed, the climate became more erratic, and humans appeared with fire, arrows, and hunger. Some believe that Civatherium survived until just 8,000 years ago. If so, it lived long enough to see Homo sapiens paint its figure in caves, to become a symbol, a totem, the shadow of a shared memory. Their memory fades like an extinct constellation in the firmament of the past, but one only has to look at their time-carved skulls to feel them close, to imagine them walking among the trees again, like an ancient spirit still guarding the savannas that were once their throne. However, in another corner of the planet, an even more colossal creature defied all understanding. A shadow among the trees, a hairy giant whose footsteps echoed like legends, the Gigantopithecus. Deep in the jungles of Southeast Asia, where the mist curls through the branches like an ancient whisper, and the light barely filters through the ancient trees, lived a creature that defied logic, science, and imagination. Its name was Gigantopithecus. It wasn't a mythological beast. It was real, and it was the largest primate that ever existed. As imposing as a myth, as elusive as a legend. Its footprints, now lost, marked the paths of a world still without memory. Gigantopithecus blacki, its best-known species, inhabited the dense forests of what is now China, Vietnam, Thailand, and nearby regions. There, it walked slowly, perhaps upright, perhaps half-crouching, but always silent, as if it knew its story would one day be told among the shadows. It left no complete skeletons, only fragments of jawbones, enormous teeth, like stones carved by tremendous force. With these, paleontologists have tried to reconstruct its face, its body, its life. But all we have are echoes. It is estimated that it could reach up to 3 meters in height when fully raised, and that its weight was around 500 kilograms. An ape of colossal proportions, taller than any man, heavier than a bear, and yet all its power was at the service of harvesting. It was herbivorous. It fed mainly on bamboo, hard fruits, roots, and leaves. It was a gentle colossus, a guardian of the forest that never wielded claws, only teeth for grinding plant fibers. Its size, however, was its downfall. In an environment that was beginning to fragment, where trees were falling and climates were changing, such a large body needed constant abundance. And when that abundance began to dwindle, its species began to disappear. It wasn't a cry, It wasn't a war, it was a long sigh, a silence that settled between the treetops until nothing remained but absence. And yet, their memory never completely died. Local cultures began to speak of hairy men who inhabited the mountains, of enormous shadows that avoided humans. Names emerged: Yeti, Sasquatch, the Man of the Woods, creatures shrouded in superstition and fear. Many believed these legends were born not from fantasy, but from the residual memory of a species that once walked among us, as if Gigantopithecus had left a mark not only in the mud, but in our cultural genetics. Science, even with all its tools, hasn't been able to answer all the questions. What exactly caused it to become extinct? Did it interbreed with the first humans in Asia? Was it feared or worshipped? We don't know. But what we do know is that it existed, that its jaw still creaks under the pressure of time, and that its story, though incomplete, continues to beat among the wet leaves of the jungle. And just when we thought we had met the greatest land colossus of the jungles, we discovered that, on a lost island in the Indian Ocean, an even stranger and more gigantic creature walked among ferns and shadows: the Warumbi Titan, the largest bird in history. Far from the known continents, on an island isolated by oceans and centuries of independent evolution, walked an impossible creature. It didn't fly, it didn't sing, it didn't run gracefully, but each step was like a drumbeat of time. It was the Warumbi Titan, the largest bird in history, a feathered colossus that defied the sky without ever needing to rise above it. In Madagascar, that natural laboratory where evolution dares to daydream, this bird was queen and guardian of a world that seemed frozen in a magical era. She stood over 3 meters tall and weighed nearly a ton. Taller than any man, heavier than any feline, older than the memory of the people who would later populate the island. Her body was robust, cylindrical, almost architectural, a thorax like a shield, legs like living columns, a neck that rose like a vegetal watchtower. She didn't need to fly to be majestic. Her presence filled the landscape. Her gait was enough to change the course of a herd. She was herbivorous, but not passive. She chose her food with ancient precision: large fruits, young shoots, tender leaves of palm trees and shrubs. She dispersed seeds throughout the forest, transforming her environment with each meal. She was more than a creature. She was an ecological force, a silent engine shaping the ecosystem. Within her lived the cycle of the forests. In her steps, the architecture of life. But even in a paradise like Madagascar, nothing remains unchanged forever. The arrival of humans was, as so often, an irreversible change. Barely 1,000 years ago, the first seafaring peoples reached the island, and with them came fire, traps, hunting, and fear. For a creature so large, so visible, so trusting after centuries of isolation, the encounter was fatal. It had no natural enemies. Until humans learned to look at it with hunger. The remains of Warumbi Titan appear today in ancient human settlements, fragments of broken bones bearing marks from primitive tools, long bones used as beams, giant eggshells turned into vessels. She was hunted, yes, but also admired. Some turned her into a totemic symbol. Others remembered her as a sacred spirit of the forests. But nothing could stop her extinction. A recent extinction, near, painful. And yet, in certain villages in Madagascar, the elders still speak of birds that walked like elephants, of footsteps that shook the earth. They don't tell it as a fable. They tell it as a story, as if in some lost corner, among mangroves and ruins, a forgotten feather still remained, an echo of its voiceless song, as if the Warumbi Titan refused to disappear completely. But further north, in the cold lands of Europe, another colossal beast raised its head in the mist, wearing a crown of bone that touched the heavens. It was the Megaloceros giganteus, the deer of the gods. As the snows of the last great glacier began to retreat, slowly revealing the heather-covered hills and valleys still drenched in silence, a silhouette rose from the mist like a sacred vision. It wasn't a predator. It wasn't a furtive shadow. It was a declaration of the world's primeval beauty, Megaloceros giganteus. Its mere presence was enough to transform the landscape. With antlers stretching more than 3 meters across, this titanic stag seemed to carry the foliage of an entire forest on its head. It didn't walk, it paraded. It didn't flee, it danced in the breeze. In the ancient fields of Ireland, the plains of Eurasia, and the edges of glaciers, its figure was unmistakable. It was the spirit of wild elegance. It stood over 2 meters at the withers, but its true grandeur lay in its antlers, a masterpiece of bone that served not only for combat, but for seduction and ritual. Because the Megaloceros was not a simple animal, it was a sacred actor in the theater of reproduction and survival. Every year, when the first cold weather announced autumn, the males raised their heads, their bellows echoed among the birch trees, and the dance began. Their antlers clashed like war drums, stirring up leaves, blood, and legend. Not all survived. Not all earned the right to perpetuate themselves, but those who did were marked as symbols of strength and majesty. The history of their lineage was written on their bodies, on their antlers, the will of the ancient gods of the earth. The first humans who roamed those lands saw him. They followed him. They studied him. They painted him in deep caves, amid shadows and torches, as if they knew this being must not disappear untold. His figures adorn the walls of places like Lascaux and Chauvet, testimony to an admiration that bordered on the mystical. For those peoples without writing, Megaloceros was a message from nature, a reminder of the immense, the sacred, the fragile. But even the most beautiful giants faced their demise. As the climate changed, the forests retreated, and humans advanced with arrows and fire, food became scarce. The males, with their enormous antlers, suffered in the new, more enclosed landscapes, trapped and vulnerable. What had once been a symbol of power became a fatal liability. The balance was shattered, and one by one, they fell. Their fossil remains still frequently appear, especially in swamps and peat bogs, as if the earth refuses to fully release them. Their antlers, imposing even beneath the mud, continue to amaze those who encounter them. And when you look at them, it's impossible not to imagine them once again in the mist, raising their heads to the sky, as if still waiting for one last battle, one last dance, one last winter. But as Megaloceros faded into the northern forests, in another corner of Europe and Asia, an ancestor much closer to us bellowed with a deep voice, his gaze burning like hot coals. It was the aurochs, the primordial bull, the origin of all those who would come after him. On the vast plains of Europe and Asia, where rivers wound like veins of a still young world, and forests opened into clearings bathed in the golden light of twilight, stood a figure that seemed made of iron and muscle, the aurochs, a wild bull whose name echoed like ancient thunder among the mountains and valleys. This was no ordinary beast. It was the beginning of something far greater, the eternal bond between man and animal. The aurochs was fearless. Its black, imposing body, nearly 2 meters tall and with a horn span as wide as human ambition, was a living fortress. It moved with the solemnity of an earthly god, grazing in silence, yet ready to defend its territory with ancestral fury. When it ran, the earth shook. When it bellowed, the forest fell silent. It was the indomitable spirit of the natural world. Since ancient times, humans have observed them with a mixture of fascination and fear. They followed them, studied them, painted them on cave walls as a symbol of strength, of defiance, of something to be understood or conquered. In caves like Altamira and Chauvet, the aurochs appear again and again, majestic, eternal. For those hunter-gatherer peoples, the aurochs was much more than a source of food. It was a testament to courage, a manifestation of the wildness that throbbed right at the edge of the human world. Over time, humans ceased to be just hunters. They learned to observe the rhythm of life, to predict the seasons, to harness their strength. And that's when something momentous happened: the attempt to domesticate the aurochs. It wasn't an act of conquest, but of mutual transformation. The wild aurochs became the ancestor of all modern bovines. Cows, bulls, oxen, they all carry the memory of that untamed giant in their blood. But that domestication was also a farewell. Little by little, the wild aurochs began to disappear. Open lands were fenced, hunters became farmers, and the symbol of freedom was replaced by utility. In 1627, in the forests of Poland, the last of its kind died. Its skull was preserved, its figure remembered, but its spirit was extinguished. Or perhaps not entirely, because its power lives on in every stampede, in every bovine gaze that still retains something wild, something that cannot be completely contained. The aurochs represents an invisible boundary between the wild and the domesticated, between the struggle to survive and the will to build. It witnessed the birth of civilization and, in a way, participated in it. It gave us food, labor, shelter, and even religious symbols. It was one of the first silent pacts between humans and nature, a pact made with blood, bone, and patience. But beyond the forests and farms where the cold bites and snow covers the fields like a white shroud, another creature was preparing to face the Ice Age with a natural coat and a rock-like temperament: the woolly rhinoceros, the colossus of the frozen lands. When the icy northern winds descended like blades upon the land, and the ice carved landscapes like immutable sculptures, a creature emerged that seemed born of the cold itself: the woolly rhinoceros. Its body was a living fortress, covered in thick reddish fur that protected it from temperatures capable of shattering stone. It wasn't slow, nor clumsy. It moved with purpose, with the confidence of one who belongs to a hostile world, designed to endure. It inhabited the frozen steppes of Europe and Asia, from the British Isles to Siberia. In those vast white expanses, where the horizon blended with the sky, the woolly rhinoceros searched for frozen roots, grasses hidden beneath the snow, any vestige of life that would allow it to move forward. Its front horn, long and sharp like an ancient spear, wasn't just a defense. It was a tool for clearing the snow, for clearing a path, for dominating its environment. Despite its formidable appearance, it was not a predator. It was a quiet, solitary titan, guided by instinct and the memory of invisible paths. Its gait left deep footprints, marks that other species followed in search of safety. Even humans respected it. Cave paintings have been found in many caves depicting it with reverential detail. It was, perhaps, a symbol of persistence, of endurance in the face of the impossible. It shared territory with mammoths, bison, and early hunters. Some clashes were inevitable: arrows, spears, and fire against a 1,000-kilo hulk, protected by an armor of fur and muscle. Sometimes the men won. Sometimes the rhinoceros retreated, wounded but still standing, like a wounded god refusing to fall. It wasn't easy to defeat, but history doesn't forgive oddities. As the centuries passed, the climate changed. The earth softened, the ice retreated, and the world it had once dominated began to disappear. Its extreme adaptation, which had made it a ruler of glaciation, became its weakness. Food shortages and human pressure ultimately drove it to extinction. It said goodbye without a roar, like a glacier that silently melts, leaving only bones beneath the tundra. Today, their remains continue to emerge from the Siberian permafrost, frozen in a time that no longer exists. Some are so well preserved that they still seem to sleep, and in them we read a warning. Absolute dominion is never eternal, not even for the strongest, not even for those who seem made of ice and legend. And just when the cold seemed to reign unchallenged, from the shadows of the south emerged a creature walking upright, with intelligent eyes and tools in its hands. It wasn't a colossal predator. It was something new, something that would change everything forever. The human being. Amid woolly behemoths, giant birds, and towering apes, a seemingly fragile creature began to conquer the world. Homo sapiens. No claws, no fangs, no scales or shells. Just skin, light bones, and a fire burning in its eyes. No one would have bet everything on it. And yet, it would be this species that would end up rewriting every chapter of life on Earth. It wasn't strength that defined his rise, but the ability to imagine, to plan, to remember the past and project the future. Where a rhinoceros charged, the human wove a trap. Where a titanic bird devoured leaves, he tamed fire. In caves and canyons, he invented symbols. In bones, he found spears. In the darkness, he kindled light. He wasn't just another animal. He was a storyteller. Homo sapiens didn't just survive, they transformed. Every territory they set foot on became a new landscape. They domesticated plants, made wolves their companions, drew stories on walls, and mapped their memories. They didn't need to dominate the body, they dominated the mind. And that power was more dangerous than any fang. But with each step forward, he left behind a world. One filled with ancient creatures unprepared to share his space. Many of the giants disappeared alongside human expansion. Some were hunted to extinction. Others simply couldn't adapt to the new order. The change wasn't immediate, but it was permanent. And yet, at times, among the trees or on the plains, encounters occurred, exchanged glances between a curious sapiens and a monster from another era. Perhaps a gesture of respect, perhaps mutual fear, perhaps understanding, because both knew that something was ending, that a cycle of life and colossi was giving way to something new. Myths were born then, oral tales about beasts that once walked alongside man, stories told around the fire about birds bigger than houses, deer with crowns of bone, bulls that knew no fear. They were memories, but also warnings, because Homo sapiens didn't just inherit the earth, he also inherited its ghosts. And while humans learned to write, to smelt metal, to build cities, the remains of those giants lay buried beneath their feet, waiting to be found, waiting to be remembered, because each of them had a story yet to be told. Deep in the mountains, in caves where the echoes of time still resonate, the world's first artists recorded that which could not be forgotten. The walls were transformed into sacred canvases, with natural pigments, charcoal, blood, and saliva. The first stories were drawn, and they weren't trivial tales. They were tributes, memories, warnings. Thus began human art, recounting what the world had been. Animals dominated those images. Rhinoceroses, bison, deer, mammoths, bulls, figures drawn with astonishing precision, with an understanding of movement that still moves us centuries later. Every line had purpose. Every stroke was a bridge between the present and the past. In those caves, the giants still lived. There are no status symbols, no human portraits in heroic poses, only animals, as if the most important thing were to remember that there was a time when we weren't the center of attention, that there was a world without roads, without kings, without temples, only nature, only survival, only living legend. And in that act of painting, of recording, of narrating, Homo sapiens began to transform into something more than a survivor. He became a chronicler. Art wasn't just for decoration. It was a weapon against oblivion. It was a way to resist the passage of time. Some did it as a ritual, others for pedagogy, but they all shared the same desire: to immortalize the ephemeral, that the image of a Pelorovis, of a Megaloceros, wouldn't disappear entirely, that something of them would live on in the stroke, in the spark, in the imagination of those who would come after. The earliest civilizations inherited this impulse. In Egyptian temples, on Mesopotamian seals, in sculptures from the Indus Valley, beasts appear that look too much like those that should have disappeared by now. Perhaps they were invented, or perhaps the echo of the last survivors still throbbed in their mythologies. Because the line between history and legend is tenuous when viewed from such a distance, today, art continues to fulfill that same role. Cinema, painting, literature, all seek the same thing as those early artists: to ensure that we are not forgotten, to ensure that the giants return, even if only for a moment, to walk once again through our minds, as they did through our lands. And in doing so, they remind us of who we once were. But even now, beneath the earth, in the ice, in the desert dust, there are secrets still waiting to be revealed. Secrets buried for millennia. Sleeping creatures, waiting for someone to hear their story. In the vast tundras of Siberia, where the silence is so dense it seems weighty, and the earth never completely thaws, lie bodies that time forgot to touch. Beneath layers of permafrost, the past sleeps untouched. Mammoths with skin, rhinoceroses with preserved organs, even the contents of their stomachs still recognizable. They are not fossils. They are frozen memories, witnesses to an era frozen in the cold. Creatures that died? Yes, but never rotted. They were never completely consigned to oblivion. Every discovery is an open threshold to the abyss of history. When scientists unearth a body, they don't just recover bones. They relive a precise day, a moment when the animal walked, ate, felt the air on its fur, a moment that nature chose to preserve as if it knew someone, centuries later, would need it to understand. These icy tombs don't hold death, they hold memory. Some mammoths still have their pupils, opaque gazes that, nevertheless, still seem to hold questions. What happened? Why did the world change so suddenly? Where is everyone else? The answers are sought among recovered DNA, isotope studies, and digital reconstructions. But science, no matter how much it advances, will never be able to fully explain the sadness of a creature that died alone in the cold. And yet, the discovery of these bodies has awakened a disturbing ambition to bring them back, to clone, to revive, to rewrite. De-extinction projects are moving forward with promises of science fiction turned into a laboratory plan. What if the mammoth walked again? What if the glaciers had kings again? But the real question is, are we doing it for them or for ourselves? Because bringing back life doesn't always mean restoring balance. Sometimes it's just a way of denying grief. Human beings don't want to accept the loss of something sacred, and instead of learning, they try to rebuild, as if bringing back a body were enough to recover an era. But time can't be tamed. It can only be respected. Still, the ice keeps giving way, and with each warmer year, more secrets emerge. Not just beasts, also tools, footprints, primitive traps, traces of a shared world. Because the past isn't buried, it only waits. It waits to be heard. And when we do, we hear our own roots too. But not all the giants remained in the north. In the tropics, on lost islands, other colossi walked silently. Some with beaks, others with legs as big as drums. And one of them had a name that still resonates today, like the echo of a drum in the jungle: the dodo. On a small island in the Indian Ocean, surrounded by reefs and storms, lived a creature that had never known fear: the dodo. A fat, clumsy bird, flightless, with no natural enemies, no urgency. It was the perfect product of a closed ecosystem, of millions of years of evolution without predators. There, in the fertile solitude of Mauritius, it had found peace. But that peace had an expiration date. The dodo didn't know man. It didn't fear him. It walked toward him curiously, pecking at the ground with its enormous, hooked beak, not understanding that this strange biped was bringing about the end of its world. It wasn't direct hunting that made it extinct, though it certainly contributed. It was ships, rats, pigs, monkeys, invasive species that arrived uninvited and hungry. In just a few decades, the dodo disappeared, so quickly that its very existence was called into question. Some thought it was a myth, an exaggeration by bored sailors, but the bones spoke, and later, so did the chronicles. The dodo had existed, and its story wasn't funny. It was tragic. It held a mirror to the mirror, because its disappearance marked the beginning of an era, extinction due to human contact. Today, its image is everywhere, in cartoons, logos, children's stories. It's remembered as a symbol of clumsiness, as a joke, but the true symbol is darker. The dodo represents lost innocence, the vulnerability of closed worlds in the face of the advance of a civilization that knows no boundaries. It was the first to fall, but not the last. Behind the dodo came others: elephant birds, marsupial lions, dwarf hippos, giant tortoises, all island dwellers, all adapted to fragile balances, all destroyed as soon as man arrived. Because wherever man sets foot, the silence changes tone, and the echoes are filled with absences. Today, as the islands heat up, as tourism and urbanization expand, new species are joining the list of extinctions. The dodo wasn't the end. It was the beginning of unstoppable acceleration, but it was also a symbol, a reminder, a call not to repeat the same mistake in every corner of the planet. And yet, in the most unexplored corners, in underwater caves, in jungles not yet fully mapped, some believe forgotten creatures remain. Shadows of an ancient time that still refuse to completely disappear. And one of them lives, or lived, where ice and fire coexist, in the land of lions and red cliffs. When the sun set behind the mountains of Europe and darkness spread like a seamless curtain, it wasn't the cold that primitive humans feared most. It was the roar, a sound that came not from the sky or the earth, but from deep within. The cave lion, a predator larger than any modern lion, more muscular, more silent, and above all, closer than we would like to imagine. Contrary to its name, it didn't live in caves. Humans took refuge in them, but this lion hunted in their surroundings. It dominated the valleys and hills of Pleistocene Europe, from Spain to Siberia. Its mane was sparse or non-existent, its fur thicker, its build designed to withstand winters. It was a hunter of bison, elk, and prey that today we can only see in museums. The cave artists knew him well. At Chauvet, at Lascaux, in so many other caves, he appears again and again, not as a threat, but as a symbol, sometimes painted with respect, other times with fear, but always with presence. He is depicted with a fixed gaze, in motion, even in hunting scenes. He was part of the mental landscape of those people, a constant figure in their collective psyche. They shared territory, sometimes prey. They fought over remains. They spied on each other. The cave lion knew that man was a stranger. Man knew that the lion was a danger, but also admiration, a dark mirror, because the lion was what man had not yet dared to be, the absolute master of the landscape. And yet, human expansion, along with the decline of prey and climate change, pushed this king to the brink. Little by little, he stopped roaring. He disappeared from paintings. He ceased to be in stories. And when an animal stops being told, it begins to die in another way. His figure dissolved into legend. Today, their remains appear in deep caves, alongside human tools, as if they were still fighting over the same territory. Giant skulls, sharp fangs, bones marked by battle. And although they have disappeared from the earth, they still live on in our stories of monsters, in our dreams of power, in the distant roar we sometimes hear at night. But beyond the European valleys, where glaciers merge with the Arctic skies, another king still lurks in the mist, the woolly mammoth, and its story is too grand to be told in whispers. On the endless plains of the north, where the earth creaks beneath a layer of ice that never quite retreats, walked a being that looked like a living mountain, the woolly mammoth. It wasn't just an animal, it was a monument, with its tusks curling skyward like ivory whorls and its fur as thick as the Arctic night. The mammoth didn't crisscross the landscape, it defined it. It was the backbone of an entire ecosystem, the center of gravity of an era. It stood over 3 meters tall at the withers, weighed up to 6 tons, and walked with a powerful slowness, as if it knew nothing could challenge it without consequences. Its gait left trails in the snow, footprints that other creatures followed. It was nomadic, and each migration was a life cycle for the tundra. Wherever the mammoth passed, the earth was turned, the soil was regenerated, and seeds found space to sprout. It was a biological force as much as a physical creature. Homo sapiens knew it, hunted it, feared it, and venerated it. Cave paintings, ivory figures carved in stone, votive idols shaped like mammoths. All of these are evidence of a deep, almost spiritual relationship. For some clans, the mammoth was an ancestor. For others, a sacred enemy. And for all, a source of life. Its meat provided food, its skin provided clothing, its bones served as pillars for homes. Living near mammoths meant having everything necessary to withstand the glaciation. But even titans fall. The end of the last ice age brought changes impossible to avoid. Temperatures rose, grasses became scarce, humans advanced more rapidly. Some mammoths were trapped on islands of time, small groups that endured for millennia in remote corners like Wrangel or the islands of the Russian Arctic. But it wasn't life. It was echo. It was inglorious survival. Today, mammoths are awakening from the ice, not as living beasts, but as scientific enigmas. Some carcasses have been found with soft tissue, liquid blood, even intact organs, and with them, the temptation to bring them back. Cloning, genetic engineering, projects that promise that one day mammoths will walk again. But will they return to the world that remembers them, or to one that no longer needs them? Because a mammoth in a laboratory isn't a mammoth in the wild. It's not a symbol. It's not a force. It's materialized nostalgia. And perhaps that's the most human thing to do. Try to correct the past with the technology of the present. But the mammoth, though gone, has already returned in another sense. It lives on in our collective memory, in every story about giants, in every blank silence where we still think we hear its breathing. And as the northern giants fell, in the humid depths of South America, a silent predator prepared to write its own chapter in legend. A feline of pure muscle, with fangs capable of opening history. The Smilodon, in the vastness of the American pampas, where the sky meets the grass without asking permission, walked a shadow that didn't roar, it tore. The Smilodon, misnamed a saber-toothed tiger, although it wasn't a tiger. It was a feline, yes, but of a different order. More robust, more compact, more deadly. Its weapon wasn't just its body, it was its fangs, 2 blades that descended from its upper jaw like symbols of condemnation. He wasn't just any hunter. He didn't chase his prey for miles. He waited, he stalked, he calculated, and when he struck, it was with meticulous violence. His forelegs, powerful as hammers, brought down the enemy in seconds. Then, with a targeted, lethal bite, he would open the throat or side. He was a surgeon of death, a creature designed for ambush, for the single, final blow. Unlike modern felines, Smilodon didn't rely on speed, but on strategy. It hunted in packs, according to some studies. It was social, like lions, but more coordinated, more silent. It shared its territory with megafauna of impossible dimensions: giant sloths, glyptodonts, mastodons, and amidst them, Smilodon was the balance, the counterweight, the dark guardian of a monumental ecosystem. Its body was compact, with a thick neck and muscles taut like bowstring. Every part of its anatomy served the purpose of killing effectively. But its specialization was also its downfall. When its giant prey began to disappear, whether due to climate change or the arrival of Homo sapiens, the Smilodon lost its place. It wasn't useful for hunting small prey. It wasn't fast, nor was it versatile. It was perfect for another time. Humans knew it. Perhaps they confronted it. Perhaps they fled from it. And in the legends of Native Americans, in the tales still whispered around the fire, some still speak of a great cat with spear-like fangs, a ghost that sometimes appears between the trees and disappears as quickly as it killed. Today, hundreds of complete skeletons rest in the La Brea tar pits, caught in a trap that preserved not only their bones, but their final movements, as if they were still waiting for the moment to spring, to return, to show the world that they weren't simply beasts. They were presences, they were frontiers, but beyond the world of teeth and fangs, another kind of titan existed, one armored, invulnerable, almost motionless, a fortress on legs. In the southern fields, the glyptodont carried the weight of an entire era. In the open valleys of South America, where the soils were as old as time, a round, short, and heavy figure moved as if carrying the entire planet on its back. It was the glyptodont, a colossal armadillo, the size of a modern automobile, covered in a bony shell that made it impenetrable. It wasn't fast, it wasn't agile, but it didn't need to be, because you couldn't kill what you couldn't wound. Its body was a dome of hardened scales, a natural architecture of fused plates that resisted the attacks of any predator. Even the Smilodon hesitated before attacking one. And if it did, it had to do so with surgical precision, because a miscalculated charge could mean a broken jaw or useless claws. The glyptodont didn't attack. It resisted. It was the very image of absolute defense. He had a stiff, armed tail, sometimes tipped with a bony club that could shatter bones with a single blow. He walked slowly, but each step left an indelible mark. It was as if time moved with him. He fed on grasses, roots, whatever the earth offered. He was a symbol of geological persistence, a reminder that nature can also protect itself by wrapping itself in its own skin. It coexisted with humans on the South American continent, and in some excavations, shells used as shelters, like rudimentary structures, have been found. Homo sapiens not only hunted it, they inhabited it. They lived in its shadow, as if the glyptodont continued to protect even after death. Its shell became a home, its body a legend. But the slow march of the centuries spares no one. Changes in climate, vegetation, and ecosystems, along with human pressure, wiped out their species, not in a great cataclysm, but in a silent decline. One by one, they disappeared, leaving only fossils, and in some cases, echoes of stories. Today, his image lives on in sculptures, in museums, in the astonished eyes of those who discover that, once upon a time, an armadillo the size of a war tank walked the same ground we walk on. And knowing this, something inside us is reactivated, a primitive memory, a forgotten respect, and so we continue advancing along the path of fallen giants. But there are still titans yet to awaken, creatures who crossed entire eras, leaving marks not only in stone, but in the consciousness of those who survived them. In the primeval swamps of the Paleocene, when the dinosaurs were already dust and mammals were just beginning to explore their realms, a silent shadow slithered through the mangroves, invisible beneath the warm mud. It had no legs. It needed no claws. It was pure muscle, pure stealth, pure power. Titanoboa, the largest snake ever to have existed on Earth, a whisper of death that could reach more than 14 meters in length and weigh over a ton. Unlike modern snakes, Titanoboa didn't crawl through dry bushes or hunt small prey. Its territory was the tropical swamps of northern South America, where it reigned among ancient crocodiles, giant tortoises, and trees still in their early stages. There, amidst vapors and submerged roots, it would wait motionless for hours, camouflaged in the humid calm of midday. When prey approached, the attack was as swift as it was absolute, a body that coiled, squeezing, crushing. It was a cold-blooded predator, but with a fiery presence. Its size was a product of an exceptionally warm climate. Every cell in its body depended on the ambient temperature, and because the Earth was warmer then, Titanoboa grew beyond its known limits. It was the direct result of a planet without winter, but that very condition was its fragility. All it took was for the Earth to cool slightly, for it to disappear. Scientists discovered it in the coal mines of Colombia, where fossils surfaced like secrets too big to remain buried. Between ribs curved like swords and vertebrae the size of a human fist, they reconstructed a monster, but not one of fiction. One who truly dragged his body through the mud of the world, who ruled with the sole force of silence. Titanoboa isn't just a symbol of power, but of balance. A creature perfect for its environment, it disappeared as soon as that environment changed. It wasn't hunted. It wasn't invaded. It was abandoned by its own world, like a queen dethroned not by betrayal, but by the passage of time. Today, its name circulates in documentaries, video games, and novels. But what's most impressive isn't its size, but its story. Because Titanoboa represents that unique moment when nature allows itself to be excessive, when life decides to grow beyond measure. And in doing so, it reveals what is possible, but also what is ephemeral. And while she dominated the waters of the past, at another end of time, a different creature emerged from the African mists. Smaller, closer, but just as immortal. It was the beginning of a line that would reach us. Australopithecus. Long before anyone called this planet home, when there were no names, maps, or flags, a creature walked upright across the savannas of East Africa. Not quite ape, but not yet human either. It was a transition, a threshold. Australopithecus. With its bipedal gait, its free hands, and its expanding mind, it represented the exact moment when evolution dared to change course. She lived among scattered trees and open grasslands. Her days were spent gathering fruit, searching for roots, fleeing predators that outnumbered her in strength and speed. But she had something no other animal possessed: curiosity. Her eyes didn't just look at the immediate. They searched. They analyzed. They measured the environment with a primitive intelligence that would soon transform into creativity. He didn't make tools yet, but he was beginning to use them. Sharp stones, long branches, objects transformed by intention. His hands were no longer just for climbing. They were for modifying. And that was the silent revolution. The moment a being understood that he could influence the world around him. Not just adapt, change it. Her life wasn't easy. Hunger lurked. Hyenas prowled. Climates fluctuated between drought and flood. And yet, she persisted. She walked. She taught. She nurtured. She left footprints that today, millions of years later, we still find fossilized in the hardened mud of Laetoli. Tiny feet that marked the beginning of our journey as a species. Australopithecus didn't know history, but he made it. With every decision, with every move, he opened paths that would one day become cities, temples, spaceships. It was the first heartbeat of a developing consciousness, the genesis of symbolic thought, the whisper of a question: who are we? And although it disappeared as a species, its legacy was never erased. because it was the root of everything that would come after. Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo sapiens. They all carry in their DNA the spark of that being who dared to stand up, who broke the symmetry of the animal world and looked to the horizon with new eyes. As the giants fell one by one, and the planet slowly became the setting for a single dominant species, a new chapter was being written, one in which colossal animals would no longer be protagonists, but memories. And yet, there was one that seemed to refuse to disappear, or perhaps to be forgotten: the mastodon. In the deep forests of North America, where conifers rise like the columns of a natural cathedral, an imposing figure advanced through the mist. It was like a mammoth, but different, more compact, more robust, with straighter tusks and a less mythical but equally imposing presence. The mastodon, one of the last giants to walk alongside humankind, and which accompanied us to the very threshold of history. His footsteps echoed in the leaf litter. Each movement was an ancestral choreography, as if the forest were respectfully opening up to his path. He fed on leaves, low branches, and bark. He was more of a forester than his cousin, the mammoth, more attached to the intimacy of the closed ecosystem, but there was something familiar in his gaze, something that resembled us. Native American peoples knew it. They hunted it, but they also respected it. In many cultures, the mastodon is remembered in myths as a wise beast, a protective spirit. Some say its bones were used in rituals, that its image adorned primitive totems, that its memory was passed down from generation to generation as part of the continent's founding story. Archaeological evidence suggests that humans interacted with mastodons for thousands of years, and that in many cases, their disappearance coincided exactly with the arrival of humans in new territories, as if the mastodon was waiting for us, as if it knew that the end of its time was the beginning of ours. Their extinction was slow but sure. Climate changes, shrinking habitat, human pressure, and one final blow: the loss of balance. Because when such a large species disappears, it's not just a body that's lost, it's a network that's lost, an order, an invisible thread that held an ecosystem together, and with it, a part of us also unravels. Today, the remains of mastodons are found buried beneath fields, lakes, and farms. Sometimes they emerge in excavations, other times by chance. And when they do, it's as if the past looks back at us from the earth itself, asking us what we did, what we learned, if we still remember. And so we continue walking along the path of bones and memories, because even though the giants are gone, their story isn't over yet. In the green, misty lands of New Zealand, isolated by vast oceans, creatures evolved that defied the laws of size and silence. Among them, one presence stood out: the moa, a bird without wings, without a voice, without natural predators, but with a height exceeding 3 meters and a weight approaching 250 kilos. It was like a forest spirit walking in slow motion, a feathered mountain with a calm heart. For centuries, the moa reigned unthreatened. It grazed among giant ferns, took refuge in humid forests, and raised its young in nests hidden by the vegetation. It had no need to defend itself or run. The island's ecological balance protected it, as if nature itself had built a custom-made garden for it. It was the perfect symbol of a world that had never known violence. But then, humans arrived. The Maori, navigators of the Pacific, reached the shores of New Zealand just 800 years ago. And what they found was a paradise without fear. The moa didn't flee. It didn't attack. It simply was. And that sealed its fate. In a matter of centuries, an entire family of giant birds disappeared from the planet, hunted relentlessly, exploited without restraint, annihilated without conscience. Behind their disappearance came collapse. The forests shifted, the soils altered, and a creature that depended on them, the Haast's eagle, also fell. Because the moa wasn't just another body, it was a pivot, and when it broke, the ecosystem crumbled. Once again, an island that had evolved over millions of years was transformed in a single generation. Today, the moa exist only in legends and bones, in caves, in museums, in the echoes of oral tales. Some claim to have seen them. Others believe they still survive in the most remote corners of the island. But the silence they left behind after their disappearance is too profound to deny, and too recent to forget. The moa was, perhaps, the last of the true flightless titans, a creature that embodied the peace of a world before human conflict. And in its disappearance, it left us with an open question. Can life evolve in peace when humans arrive? But even further north, among the shadows of Africa, there remained a figure that seemed to refuse to die completely. A close relative, a giant who walked beside us, and who still lives within us today. The Neanderthal. In the cold caverns of Europe, beside fires struggling to extinguish, a figure sat hunched over, carving a stone tool with thick hands and dark eyes. He was a Neanderthal, our cousin, our reflection, an alternative humanity that never got to tell its own story, but lived it with the same intensity, the same doubt, the same hope. The Neanderthal was not a mindless brute. He was a complex being. He had language. He had art. He buried his dead. He cared for his sick. He dreamed. His brain was even proportionally larger than ours. But his world was different, a harsher one, colder, shorter. He lived in small migratory groups, with a life marked by the constant search for shelter and sustenance. When Homo sapiens arrived in Europe, they didn't find a vacuum. They found the Neanderthal, and for thousands of years, the two shared caves, rivers, and dams. They clashed, yes, but they also mingled. Modern DNA bears traces of them, traces of love, of violence, of encounters, of the possibility and the tragedy of two species too similar to coexist without conflict. The Neanderthal extinction wasn't instantaneous. It was a fading away, a gradual retreat into oblivion. They left behind tools, bones, artifacts, but they didn't leave a final song. Only the emptiness of a voice we no longer hear. And yet, every time we doubt, every time we feel nostalgia for something we can't name, perhaps what we miss is that other version of what we could have been. Today, their memory is reborn in genetic laboratories, in novels, in museums, but also in human intuition, in that silent knowledge that we were not alone, and that humanity's path could have been different. The Neanderthal did not fail. He was merely devastated by a history he did not write, and yet their reflection remains in our faces, in our bones, in the primitive dreams that still haunt our nights. Because if one day we forget the Neanderthal, we will also forget a part of ourselves. And as they disappeared, the earth continued to turn, relentless, fertile, transformative, preparing for a new era, the era of storytellers. There are no more titans shaking the ground with their footsteps. There are no more 3-meter-high birds watching from the undergrowth, no more ice-covered rhinos, no more saber-toothed teeth waiting in the bushes, no more deer with antlers as big as tree branches. But the echoes remain. And they resonate in every corner of the world where giants once trod. In museums, children stare at mammoth bones without fully understanding the enormity of time. In universities, scientists reconstruct the faces of creatures that no longer exist. In movies, monsters of the past are brought back to life through special effects. And in our dreams, we still walk alongside them, because the giants never truly left. The planet remembers them, in the vegetation that grew over their bones, in the rivers that changed course in their wake, in the rocks marked by their footsteps, and in us, who chronicle them, study them, mourn them. We are their heirs, not by size, but by memory. by the ability to name them when no one can see them anymore. Every time a species disappears, we lose a story, a language of nature, a verse from the poem that is life on Earth. And if we've learned anything from the giants, it's that extinction isn't a glorious end. It's an uncomfortable silence. It's the absence that's most felt when it's already too late. That's why we tell stories. That's why we remember them. Not to feel nostalgia, but to avoid repeating them. Because the world is still full of creatures that could follow their path if we don't learn. Because the next titan to disappear could be one that still lives beside us. And so we come to the edge of history, to that moment where the past can no longer be changed, but the future is still in our hands. And the last creature we face is not a prehistoric colossus, but ourselves. Today, Homo sapiens walks a planet once shared with monsters. We have no more competitors. There are no more woolly rhinos or curved-tusked felines. There are no more flightless birds or 3-meter-high apes hiding in the jungle. Only we remain, with our memory, with our fire, with our ambition. We are the new giants, but we don't have horns or shells. Our power lies not in the body, but in the ability to transform the earth, to alter oceans, to change the climate, to build cities visible from space, to extinguish with a single decision, and also, sometimes, to save with an act of conscience. The question is no longer whether we rule the world, it's what we will do with it, whether we will take care of it, whether we will learn from the past, whether we will honor those who passed away before us. Because the story of giants is not a story of monsters, it's a story of balance, of error, of beauty, of warning. We still have time to preserve what remains, to restore what we can, to look at the ancient bones and understand that destiny is not written in stone, but in our daily choices. Every forest protected, every species saved, every child who learns about the giants of the past is a victory. We are the only ones who can tell this story, but we are also the only ones who can prevent it from repeating itself with new protagonists. Not with mammoths, not with glyptodonts, but with elephants, with living rhinos, with the still-breathing jungles, with ourselves. Because the true giants aren't the biggest. They're those who understand the weight of what's gone. And yet, despite that, they choose to tread carefully. The giants no longer walk among us. Their footsteps have vanished beneath centuries of earth, ice, and silence. But their story remains, not as ruins, not as dust, but as a living warning, a forgotten legacy that can still teach us humility in the face of time, the planet, and life. Each creature we met on this journey was more than a colossal body. It was a lesson of adaptation, of beauty, of fragility. Now it's our turn. Today, humankind has become the Titan who watches over everything from above. But what will we do with that power? Will we follow the same path that led so many to extinction? Or will we finally be the first giants aware of their impact? The true legacy isn't in the bones. It's in the memory we choose to honor. If this story moved you, if it sparked your curiosity about those who inhabited the world before we arrived, subscribe to the channel. Your participation keeps this type of content alive. Share this video with those who need a reminder that the past isn't dead. It breathes in every decision we make. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the upcoming stories we'll continue to tell. Because the Earth's memory is vast, deep, and still holds secrets yet to be revealed. And together, we can uncover them. We can give voice to what was silenced. Comment below which of these giants impressed you the most. Which creature would you like to have seen with your own eyes? Which one do you think still has something to teach us? We want to know what you think, what you feel, what you remember. This channel is your space too. Thank you for staying until the end, for listening, for imagining, for accompanying this journey through time. Here we don't just tell stories, we share them, we feel them, and we keep them together so they won't be lost again. See you on the next journey. Until then, may history continue to beat in your memory.